Welcome to the KTPF Reload Show. In case you're wondering what the Reload Show is about, if you haven't heard previous shows, these are the interviews that were conducted by good friends of mine, Steve and Sue Taggart, in the days of the KTPF radio show. Their own radio show ran for just over 4 years, broadcasting every week for over 3 hours. I joined them in the last 18 months of the show's run, but eventually the guys felt they'd just about had enough. It was a monumental effort to keep broadcasting every week for 3 hours. It was a wonderful show. But unfortunately they're no longer involved, and the shows have just sort of sat in the archives, so I thought it would be nice to bring them back to life and bring you the interviews that the guys conducted over those 4 years. They include some of the most interesting people within the world of the paranormal, and some not so well known, but nevertheless still very interesting. We even have 1 or 2 rather unusual shows, including a live seance and other things along those lines. Anyway, hopefully you enjoyed tonight's show, and this is the KTPF Reload Show. Enjoy.
This program deals with themes of an adult nature and is intended for a mature audience. They've landed.
You're in the right place. Online, on the web, and on air. All over the world.
Talk radio.
You hear us, we hear you.
Yeah, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of the KTPF Community Talk Show, live and uncensored from Manchester. My name is Suzanne.
And I'm Steve.
And over in Essex, we have our regular co-host, Andy Mercer. Now, we're here keeping the paranormal friendly, so pull up a chair and relax with us while we bring you through the supernatural, the paranormal, and other strange phenomena. Right, well, let me tell you what's coming up today. We have Kevin Goodman talking about the Warminster UFO mystery. Now, apparently, when it happened back in 1964, cars stopped, birds were killed, children terrified, and reports of strange humming noises, tremors, lights, crop circles, and UFOs were seen. Co-author of 2 books on the Warminster UFO mystery, Kevin was a sky watcher during the heady days of 1970s and continues to be interested in the UFO phenomena that occurred. So we're going to find out what did happen in that small leafy Wiltshire town. And Kevin, I must say that Kevin and his co-author Steve Dewey, who's not with us tonight, are the acknowledged experts in this most unusual case. So that's what's happening tonight. Now, Andy, on the subject of human pendulums.
Oh, yes.
I believe you have something to tell us. Would you like to kill a few minutes?
Yeah, I can do. I went to a Therapy Psychotherapy conference yesterday, which is an annual conference organisation I'm a member of, and one of the speakers there, he's talking partly about his own form of therapy that he's come up with that is a combination of what's called kinesthetic therapy, involving things like tapping routines, etc., and the science behind it, rather than just sort of being airy-fairy woo-woo. He's actually a PhD graduate in physics, so he knows his stuff scientifically. Features that he's discovered is that depending on whether you're positively or negatively orientated, or how you're wired in the brain effectively, you can get a yes answer to something by thinking the word yes quite clear in your head. You start to lean forwards, and if you think the word no, you start to lean backwards. And it's been a phenomenon that's been tested over and over again. The vast majority of the population work that way. A few people work the reverse, as in they'll go backwards for yes and forward for no. But if you then tap on a particular meridian point on your hand, you reorientate yourself, and then you will do the same thing as everybody else. You'll lean forward for yes and backwards for no. It's a neuropsychological phenomena. It's been investigated. I mean, there's lots of science behind it, but it's something to do with, positive and negative thinking, that you're naturally drawn forward to positivity and away from anything negative, including negativity like the word no, because it's sort of a connotation of not nice, negative stuff. Whereas yes is an affirmative, it's happy to do something. You tend to, psychologically, we tend to go towards things that are yes and away from things that are no. So if you're just standing there and people saying yes and no to you, and you're thinking it is the same with me, and you want there to be something there, the chances are you're going to lean forward. Because you want it to be there with you, and then you might lean backwards if you don't want it to be with you. So it kind of pretty much explains the human pendulum effect, that it is down to what you're thinking rather than anything else. So I just thought I'd mention that.
Yes. Right, we better get our guest on.
Oh, yes.
Time is fleeting. Right, let's add him to the group. Are you ready for this, Andy?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think Andy's looking forward to this one, actually.
I am interested, yes.
Let's see if we can get him on the line. So to speak. Are you there, Kevin? Can you come forth?
I am forth. I am here.
Good evening, Kevin. Welcome to the KTPF Community Talk Show.
Good evening.
And tonight we're going to be talking about all things ufology. Starting off, really, how long have you been interested in this subject, Kevin?
Oh, Lord. Now, that is a personal question.
How personal?
I'd say getting on to 45 odd years.
Really?
Yes.
God. So, when it comes to Warminster, first of all, to start with, where is Warminster?
Warminster is in the county of Wiltshire, about 120 miles east of London.
Okay.
Probably between Bath and Salisbury.
When we mentioned it last week, people were getting mixed up with Dad's Army.
Warmington. Close.
Okay. So, when we spoke yesterday, I mentioned to you that not a lot of my listeners have heard of Warminster. Why do you think that this is? And why do you think it's not so relevant as the Rendlesham Forest incident?
Warminster was very much a product of its times, really, in so much that it lasted for getting on towards 15 years. And as I briefly explained to you yesterday when we were doing a test transmission, in 1978 the South Wales phenomenon started, which was known as the Welsh Triangle or the Dovin Enigma. That lasted for about 2 years. Then, of course, in 1980, Rendlesham hit the headlines, just again as what we now class as multimedia was becoming out of its infancy. And I think the problem is with Rendlesham now being compared to Roswell, that there's a lot more interest in it because supposedly there's a lot more information available.
Right. Okay. And you don't feel there's a lot of information available about Warminster?
There was in the 60s and the 70s.
Yeah.
There's no two ways about it. But the problem with the UFO subjects in this country these days is that you're only as good as your latest flap or your latest breaking news.
Yeah.
So, Warminster was dying out by the end of the 1970s. Wells came along, took the mantle up, and then, of course, obviously Rendlesham after that, and Rendlesham has still, to this day, refused to die.
Yeah, I've noticed that. In many ways. So, as I say, it's not your usual story of UFO sightings that happened in the 60s. So can you tell us how it all started?
Well, there is a date which most people use as the start, which was Christmas Eve in 1964. But research that I've done over the years has proved that there was other strange phenomenon seen within the locality maybe hundreds of years before that.
Really?
For example, there was a report of two landed gentlemen seeing strange lightning bolts and balls in the sky of different colour, apparently fighting each other. That was in the 17th century. And then just a few years after the Wright brothers took their first faltering steps into the sky at Kitty Hawk, a large illuminated aeroplane, and I use the word aeroplane in inverted commas, was seen flying over the area at speed.
Really?
So you're talking 1909, 1910, something like that, which again could tie into the Scandinavian airship scare.
Yeah.
But like a lot of things within the UFO subject, the subject itself is continually morphing and moving on.
So how did it all start? There was talk about, where are we? That birds were killed. There was cars that stopped, tremors, lights, and crop circles appeared.
Yeah, not all at once, I hasten to add.
Okay.
Okay, well, as I say, it broke, in inverted commas, Christmas morning, actually, 1964, when a local housewife, Mrs. Marjorie Bye, was on her way to early mass at, I believe it was Christchurch in Warminster, where she was assailed by sonic sounds, which, according to Arthur Shuttlewood's report, left her weak-kneed numb and scared. So that was the actual first modern day sort of manifestation of the thing. And at the same day, there were reports of mysterious explosions and noises seen throughout the locality. For example, Roger Rump, who was then at the time Warminster's head postmaster, stated that it was as if all 5,000 tiles of his bungalow had been wrenched off the roof and slammed back into place. Now, the reason why he knows there was 5,000 tiles was he had just had the roof retiled.
Right. Okay. so that's why he was so exact.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So regarding the noises, were they similar to the sounds that we've been hearing in recent years? And if so, do you think there's a connection?
I've heard one or two recordings of the noises. Now, I mean, sadly, again, nobody ever seems to have actually had an audio recording of the noises over in Warminster, because, again, we are talking something that is over 50 years old now. So,
yeah.
You know, even cassette recorders weren't really around in those days. So, you know, if somebody was lucky enough to have a reel-to-reel recorder and a microphone plugged in, switch it on, drag it to a window, open the window and stick the microphone out, and he might have heard something.
Yeah.
But the noises that you allude to, I definitely think there is a similarity to these noises that have been heard throughout the world over about the last 18 months to 2 years, in similar respect to what started the Warminster phenomenon off.
Because they talk about a cracking noise, don't they? One witness was talking about crackling noises.
Yes, they did. It was like somebody else actually reported that it was if a branch or a bough of a tree had been dragged across the roof, making this sort of crackling, whistling noise. So, as I say, you know, there were different types of noises which were alluded to for, I must getting on for about the first 6 months, well into 1965, until the actual visual manifestation started around May, June time.
Right, okay. Now, just out of curiosity, are there any military units in the area that could be the reason for the phenomena? Could these sightings be from another planet or dimension, or maybe just some of our own black ops or reversed engineered aliens ships being sighted?
That is a very interesting question. It
Okay.
involves a very convoluted answer.
Okay.
And I'll try and break it down in bits for you. Yes, there is a large military presence in the area. Warminster in the mid-1960s was really famous for only three things. The School of Infantry, which is based just outside the town. It's now known as the School of Land Warfare. Would you believe Geest had a banana ripening plant in the town itself, which is sadly no longer there now.
I used to work for them.
Really?
Yeah, but not there.
No, I thought people were bananas. However, and the third thing was the very, very early days of the Longleat Safari Park, which again opened about 1965 and 1966.
All right.
So, yes, there definitely was a military presence.
Yeah.
And a lot of people over the years have said, oh, yes, it's all military technology, it's all black ops. But bearing in mind, as I said just a minute ago, this thing is now over 50 years old. If they were testing at that time what was cutting-edge technology, it would have been retired years ago.
Right, okay. So that's the answer to that one.
There is a sort of further answer, which I'll come on further on, obviously, if the questions are going to go the way I think they're going.
Okay, well, I'm not going to diss you on this. Honestly, I'm following your lead. So if you want to just take us there, it's not a problem. Like I said, this is all new to me, this Warminster thing, which is what they called it, wasn't it? A thing.
It was known as the Warminster Thing, because Warminster at that time was a very small town. It was a country town, and a lot of the people there had very little experience of what we now class as UFO. So anything that was unknown was referred to as the thing or the things. So obviously it was a generic title which the people of the town used to christen this phenomenon.
Yeah. Okay, so when it come to the MOD, what was their response to this event? Did they ever investigate?
They did investigate to a degree. For example, going back to those strange noises on Christmas morning, some soldiers at Nook Camp, which is about 4 or 5 miles outside of Warminster on the western side, going towards Salisbury, they heard what appeared to be, they said it sounded like a huge chimney stack being demolished and crashing to the ground. The guard was alerted, a search was made, nothing was seen, nothing was out of the ordinary. And yes, I do believe the military did quietly investigate some of the more stranger aspects of the Warminster phenomenon over the years, which does bring me, actually, jumping ahead quite a way, to about 10 years ago. I was emailed by a woman who basically said that during the early 70s, she and her family were based at Warminster in the army camp, and because her father was employed. And he often used to go out on what they referred to as stag duty. Now, stag duty is basically guard duty. And they would, to alleviate the boredom, often skywatch themselves, and they would see things that they could not rationally explain. And at one time, somebody did go to one of the senior members of the camp and say, look, we've seen this strange light, it's done this, it's done that, it's done the other. And even the commander basically said, well, whatever it is, we don't know what it is because we had no exercises that night planned whatsoever. So whatever you saw was strange.
Right, okay. Can I just jump back a bit, because we've got a question here. Andy's just put it up. Andy's with us in the on the Skype there. He was wondering what did you mean by the Scandinavian scare? Can you just tell us a bit about that?
The Scandinavian airship scare, that was around the time of the First World War and just at the end of the First World War. No, sorry, I tell a lie. It's the Scandinavian rocket ship scare.
Okay.
The rocket ship scare was around, as I say, the First World War and just after, where strange ballistic strike missiles, objects were seen over the Scandinavian peninsula for a couple of years. And the airship one that I allude to was actually in the United States way back in the 1800s.
Ah, right. I'd heard of that one, I think, about the airship in America. That's why I wasn't sure about Scandinavian. But yeah, that makes sense. That's fair enough. Just as I say, you mentioned it, I thought perhaps the listeners would want to have a bit more of an idea what that one was about. So,
yeah,
thanks,
sorry,
yeah.
I do get confused occasionally. I blame my aged brain cells.
No, I know that problem.
Steve, have you got some questions?
Yeah, the BBC, I understand, did a 30-minute documentary called Pie in the Sky.
Oh, yes.
Have you seen it? And if you did, did you think it was? Did you think they were fair?
I thought they were fair. For the 1960s, they were very fair. Admittedly, the chief reporter was a little bit biased, but the whole thing was not treated, shall we say, with the disrespect that some modern programmes probably show. In so much that in 1978, I think it was, the BBC did a second programme, not specifically about Warminster, and this was called, I think, Out of the Unknown. And Arthur Shuttlewood, who I will come to in a few minutes if somebody reminds me, he was actually approached to appear in this. The BBC spent 2 nights up on Cradle Hill, supposedly recording Arthur. By the end of the second night, Arthur was getting a lot more comfortable with them. He let his guard down slightly, and sadly, they chose the most outlandish story that Arthur could have told them to actually broadcast on that programme.
Oh, right, okay. Steve?
Yeah, I was going to ask you a question about Arthur, actually, because he actually wrote 3 books, didn't he?
He wrote 6.
6 altogether, was it? I know he did towards the end have some rather strange ideas, apparently. I haven't actually read them myself, so I don't know what they were.
Right. Well, as I say, he wrote in total 6 books. The Warminster Mystery, which was the breakout book, which was published by Neville Spearman. Its actual working title was The Warminster Sighting, but apparently somebody at Neville Spearman felt that the Warminster Mystery had a little bit more punch and pizzazz, so they decided to go with that. I believe that the Warminster Mystery was a moderate bestseller when it was first published around 1967, so Shuttlewood then took the decision to have his second book, Warminster Warnings from Flying Friends, self-published in Warminster. That was still doing the rounds well into the late 1970s, 1980s. Arthur must have had tens of thousands of copies of that printed, but it didn't sell the vast amounts that he was hoping it did. And then, of course, the final book of his first trilogy is, I do believe, the one that you're alluding to, which is UFO's Keys to the New Age, where Arthur does start to have some very, I'd use the expression cod, scientific theories about UFOs.
See, that's what I know the name from. I've been trying to think where I know that chap's name from, and it's the book you just mentioned. That's the one. Yeah. Yes. I wonder if I could just ask a quick question, Kevin. Could you give us just a brief summary about? Pretend I know nothing about this, which isn't too far from. You've had a busy week, no chance to do much reading. But give us a brief explanation of what actually happened during that time. What the sort of things have been reported? What kind of length of time we're talking about?
Well, as I say, we're talking around in total 15 years. I was involved towards the end of it because I was far too young in 1965, 1966 to go down to Wiltshire on my own. I was still in short trousers in those days. It started, as I say, with about 6 months of strange, unearthly sounds being heard. And then around the May-June time of 1965, the visual manifestations started. I believe the first sighting was made by a group of council workers on the town's central car park looking over towards Cobb Heap, which is an ancient Iron Age fort and burial mound. And they saw two red-hot pokers in the sky which burst asunder and then flew off in various directions. By this time, Arthur Shuttlewood, who was a reporter with the local newspaper, the Warminster Journal, was amassing a set of reports that people were coming to him with. He obviously wrote his first book, and then he actually got his own sky-watching group together of 3 people, himself, Sybil Champion, and an ex-RAF bomber pilot by the name of Bob Strong, who was their photographer. They basically recorded and documented the Warminster phenomenon into the 1970s, well beyond the 1970s, into the 1970s at least. And then they obviously more people became involved, people such as Robert Chapman, who wrote a book called UFOs Over Britain. And I also believe Timothy Good was also a member of the Skywatching group in Warminster at one stage.
Okay, we've got some questions in the chat room for you. I was just reading one there, so I got lost. One I was going to ask you a bit later, but I'll ask you now, because Brendan Moss has also asked the same question. Have you had any personal experiences of UFOs? Which is one that I was going to ask anyway, but do you want to answer that now?
I will answer that for you now. The answer for that is yes.
And where have you seen these things? You can't just say yes. You've got to explain.
Of course I can. I've got to eke it. I've got to eke this out, haven't I? Okay. Again, I'll give a bit of my back history before I actually answer the question in full. I was brought up a very good Catholic boy. My parents were both devout Catholics. Church every Sunday, Catholic junior school. And at about the age of 9 or 10, I began to sort of question things, which a lot of particularly boys in those days did, because it was the Gemini and Apollo space programs. And my mother came upstairs one night. I'd already gone to bed in inverted commas. She came into my room, whipped the eiderdown off me, and I don't think she was more horrified that I was reading a copy of Eric von Daniken's Chariots of the Gods, or if it wasn't a copy of Penthouse.
I was going to say, yeah, what are you going to say then?
I have to be polite.
Yeah.
So that's where the interest came from. And as I say, it was 1976 by the time I finally got down to Warminster. I don't know if either of you were old enough to remember the summer of 1976. It was
It was nice and warm. And they were frying eggs on the pavement.
It was very warm. It's the only time I have gone up to Cradle Hill outside of Warminster to stay up till 2 o'clock in the morning, and I've only had to wear a T-shirt and a light pair of trousers. Right. It was that hot. Now, it was July 1976 I first went down, and on the first Saturday night, the first day we got there, obviously expectation was at an absolute premium. So my friend and I walked up in the company of a young lad from Warminster to Cradle Hill, totally not knowing what we were going to see, what the area was like, what we were going to expect to see, or anything like that. And do any of you remember UFO detectors?
No, I don't.
Right. Quick history lesson here again. It's amazing. This at the time was fantastic technology. I mean, it's so now primitive, it's almost like looking at a stone wheel. They were battery-powered devices. Do you know the toys that you can get, or not the toys, but the things you used to have in science labs where you had a hoop of metal that you used to run over like a wiggly course?
Yes.
And if it made a connection, it beeped?
Yes.
Right. That's basically a UFO detector.
Oh.
That's the principle. Because the idea was these detectors, people believed that UFOs were tapping into the Earth's magnetic field. And there was a compass point which was basically between two electrodes. If the magnetic field variated, the compass needle would move, would hit one of the electrodes, and the buzzer would sound. There were two of these items up on the hill that night, on that very first night. It was a beautifully warm night. There was hardly any wind. These two devices were were away from each other. They were both sheltered from the wind. One was actually under a car, if I remember correctly. And both went off simultaneously. And we looked up, started to scan the skies, and there were two starlight objects transversing the sky at moderately fast speed, turned through 90 degrees, carried on, and then just winked out. That was my first real Warminster UFO on the first night.
Wow.
Oh.
Interesting.
Scary.
Sure,
It
what's
is
the most-
scary. Go on, Andy.
I'm going to say, what's the most recent report that you're aware of? I mean, are they still regularly happening now?
No, they're not. Sadly, I now live back in my old hometown, my home stomping ground up in the West Midlands. And we have up here what is known as the Dudley Dorito.
Okay.
Which is a triangular-shaped craft which flies over the area quite sort of at random and quite freely. A lot of people do dismiss it as secret military technology. Now, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, by the way. I am very level-headed these days. But the one thing that I always retort back is people say to me, oh, it must be secret military technology from Cosford or from an American airbase. Yeah, then why fly over one of the most densely populated areas of the United Kingdom?
Yeah. Good point.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Tony Martin's in the chat room. He says, I recall seeing some old news footage with ufologists with their gizmo tools on a Skywatch. Were they one of the first ever UFO groups, and do you know many of them?
There are more UFO groups than you can shake a hatful of coins at.
Okay.
And UFO groups do love their acronyms. One of the earliest ones was obviously Bufora. There was the British UFO Society. There was the Flying Saucer Society. There was the Eurytheus Society. There is now the Birmingham UFO Group. It seems that every major town seems to have their own particular group. I do try and stay clear as many of these groups as possible, simply because there is so much politics involved in this subject these days.
Yeah.
I do not want to get involved.
No, I can understand that. So how did you actually get involved in the phenomena? What? Obviously you were interested in it, but your involvement in it now, how did it all come about?
Well, my involvement initially started in the early 70s because there was an imprint in those days called Tandem. And Tandem Books had the rights to republish all of the Neville Spearman books that had been released in the 60s in paper, in hardback, but Tandem would do them in paperback. So you had people like Brinsley Power Trench, Donald Kehoe, Arthur Shuttlewood, Brad Steiger. All these people's books were being published into a mass market, and they were coming out at about one every 2 weeks. So you can imagine where my pocket money went in the early 70s. And one day I was in the local bookshop and I saw this book, The Warminster Mystery. And I thought, oh, here we go, another UFO book.
Yeah.
I picked it up and I looked at the front, and the byline was dramatic UFO eyewitness sightings in England. Now, up until then, I had believed that 90% of UFO sightings and the UFO phenomenon was American-based. Suddenly, here was something in the UK.
Yeah.
And I read that book in one sitting.
Okay.
And from that day on, I said, I'm going down to that town, which I did do initially, then again in 1976. Mm-hmm. So my interest carried on, probably well into the 1980s. And then you get a bit older, you get a bit wiser, yes, you get married, you settle down. And then, without going into too much detail, my poor late wife finally decided to leave this earthly coil in 2003. And I thought to myself then, she had cancer.
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, what the hell am I going to do at night? Mm. You know, I spent the last 4 years looking after her.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden I've got this void ahead of me. And unbeknownst to me, Helen, my late wife, had not thrown out this aged manuscript of my story that I started way back in the 1980s. Mm. And I found this in the bottom of a packing crate or whatever. And I remember to this day sort of sitting down, starting to read it and thinking, my God, I could do better than that now. You know, it's a bit like reading Janet and John Go to the Planet Mars. So I set to work, and again, with the marvels of the modern age and the internet, I started to do more and more research, and I kept coming across this name by the name of Steve Dewey.
Yeah.
Now, I thought to myself, do I know this guy? Because he knows his stuff about Warminster. And suddenly I had one of those light bulb moments when I suddenly thought, hang on a minute, that's the Steve Dewey I met in 1976. So I got in contact with him, and we obviously had a number of pleasant chatty email exchanges. And he said to me, look, tell you what, I'm actually a technical author by trade. Send me your book and I'll have a look at it and I'll see if I can add to it or if I can improve it. Mm. Well, all I say is that's one of the best decisions I've ever made in my life. So much so that Steve took the bull by the horns. He took the manuscript, pulled it up by its socks, and gave it a damn good thrashing. And the books finally saw the light of day, I think, in 2007.
Wow. So it was obviously meant to be then.
Oh, I do believe it was, yes.
Yeah. So my next question for you is basically about the sightings that were seen after that. You've briefly mentioned them. There was the cigarette-shaped object, and the two hot pokers that people had seen. So what was that all about?
Well, again, you're talking something 50 years ago. It was reported in those days as best it could. Mm. But chances are that I would say 95% of the people that were around in the 60s are now no longer with us, so we can't actually now go back and interview them unless we've got a TARDIS. But you're asking about sightings and whatever. I'll tell you another one that I had, and this one to this day still does spook me, to be perfectly honest with you.
Yeah.
It was in April of 1977. Another friend and I were walking down from Cradle Hill Copse towards what we called the White Gate area. And in front of us was Battlesbury Hill, and over to the right was the West Wilts Golf Club. And we just happened to glance across towards the golf club, and there were these four red lights coming over the sky. Equally distant spaced apart, just pulsing. And by the time we got down to the White Gate area, they were in a line stationary above Battlesbury Hill. And they just stayed there flashing for about a minute. And then the extreme left-hand object shot off horizontally to the left at speed, performed a flawless 90-degree turn without stopping, and then shot straight into the sky. And about 30 seconds, a minute later, the other remaining three objects then just shot straight up into the sky itself. Now, it was dark, it was moonless, it was moderately cold, there was no wind, and we could hear the sound of the trains going through Warminster Station about a mile away. Now, whatever these babies were, they were totally silent. They did not make a sound.
Okay.
There's a lot of clicking going on there.
No, it's all right. I'm just typing. Go on. So it didn't make a sound.
No,
So how did you feel? What was your feelings towards this?
that's it. We've seen another. I've said that's my second genuine Warminster UFO.
Wow. So
Because they ticked all the boxes. That
Yeah.
is the problem. As a seasoned sky watcher, you do have this mental tick list in your head.
yeah.
Once you've ticked all those boxes, there is only one conclusion left: UFO.
So Andy.
Yes. What would you say, in your estimation, is the origin of these things? Are we talking from other planets straight forward, interdimensional? Those kind of ideas are put forward by obviously different people about what they think. Now, I'm saying to you that I think you're talking about genuine phenomena, but where would you originate it?
If you'd have asked me that question 30 years ago, I would have been a strong advocate of the extraterrestrial hypothesis. These days, I tend, like I said before, I sit on the fence because you do have to be objective. However, on saying that, there is a core number of sightings, and I'm not just talking about Warminster, I'm talking throughout the world. There is a core small percentage of sightings which to this day define any form of rational explanation, and they are the ones that need to be investigated.
Yes, certainly agree there. A friend of mine's written a couple of books talking about the idea these things are, they're energies, if you like, that are living with us on the Earth together. They're not from outer space. These UFOs are real phenomena. They're not sort of nuts and bolts spacecraft from alien planets. They are actually energies, if you like, living creatures in themselves.
Well, the thing is, Andy, I think you've hit the nail on the head there to a degree, because like I say, you have this mental checklist, and at the end you've got UFO in big capital letters. But the problem is that for the majority of the population, you say UFO equals flying saucer. Flying saucer equals nuts and bolts spacecraft. Nuts and bolts spacecraft equals little green or grey men. And that is the problem, again, that we have to get over.
Absolutely, I agree with you entirely. That's kind of the thrust of what I was saying. I don't know if you've heard of Andrew Collins. He's a friend of mine. He's a writer.
Yes, I have indeed.
A book called Light Quest, I think, is what
I've got
most
it.
relevant. Yeah.
I've got it.
Good, excellent. I was going to suggest have a good read of that. I'm going to say
There is a Warminster chapter in there.
Oh, it is. Do you know what? I have to confess, I've only read some of it.
Naughty
Not
boy.
all of it myself, and it's terrible. So I make this book and I haven't read all of it. But I'm just trying to get another copy. I had it a while back, and long story, I linked to somebody and lost contact with them and never got it back. But yeah, so to me, more and more I'm thinking, well, this is, whilst you might say the more wackier explanation, simply because we're so used to the nuts and bolts spacecraft other planet explanation, that the idea of it being something maybe living with us seems more crazy. But I personally think more and more that this is more likely to be the case, that we're not talking about simple alien spaceships from other planets coming down again, meep and introducing themselves. We're talking about energy presences, if you like, that are living with us. They're actually part of our reality, although they could be slipping with alternatives. Yeah, absolutely.
Cultural thing now. I mean, there are reports now that some respected scientists are now saying that yes, the possibility of other dimensions does exist.
Oh,
So,
yeah, very much.
A window area such as Warminster could well be literally a gateway to and from dimensions we don't know.
Absolutely, I see that as a real possibility.
Yeah, Steve.
Yeah, I was wondering what you think of that. Why do we always think UFO equals spacecraft?
That's exactly what we're talking about, isn't it?
It's because it's the way that we've been conditioned over the years.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just seems weird to me that people automatically go aliens, and it could be any bloody thing.
Yeah.
I mean, it literally means we don't know what it is, but you'll always get a hardcore that will instantly say it's aliens.
Well, I mean, even as a seasoned sky watcher on New Year's Eve / New Year's night, I look out the window before I go to bed, there may be Chinese lanterns going over, and just for a couple of seconds, you think,
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
It's the cultural thing.
Yeah. Do you think it could happen again? Because, I know it was quite a lot of stuff that happened prior to the Christmas of '64. With the Rendlesham that happened round about the same time, could there be a connection? Could these things happen round about the same time again?
I don't know is the honest answer to that one. And as I often say, if I had an answer to a question like that, I wouldn't be driving around in a battered Ford Fiesta. I'd be in a Rolls Royce.
Too true.
Just call me Nick Pope. Oh, sorry.
Hey,
Oh dear.
So, what research are you doing now regarding Warminster?
I'm taking a little bit of a back seat to a degree these days because Steve and I have co-authored now 2 books on Warminster. There is obviously my own book, UFO Warminster Cradle of Contact. We've also done, shall we say, almost like a ladybird book of Warminster. It's called 50 Years of a Mystery, which goes into the sort of Warminster phenomenon over the last 50 years in a very sort of snappy, short, but hopefully readable style. I'm still researching it. I'm still interested in it. There's no two ways about it. Last year, I actually organised the Warminster 50 Years of the Thing event in Warminster. And this year we're doing another one called, and this is a very clever play on words, I must admit, I'm quite proud of this, Warminster Area 51.
Ah.
So
Interesting.
you can read into that one what you like, but I know exactly where I'm going on with that one. And so much so that we're actually widening the envelope now of speakers. Last year, for example, we had somebody drop out at very short notice, sadly. One of our attendees was also a speaker, and I literally on the Friday night rang them up and said, you don't fancy doing an hour's spot tomorrow, do you? Which they very kindly did at very short notice. So we're having him back, Matt Lyons, we're having him back this year. We've got John Hanson, who was with us last year. He's the author, along with Dawn Holloway, of the Haunted Skies series of books.
Yes, we've had him on the show.
Yeah, lovely bloke.
Yeah.
We've got Maria Wheatley, who...
Oh, yes, Maria.
Yep, and I think it's Matt Williams, I think. But that was only confirmed the other day. We've definitely got 4 speakers so far. We're looking at a 5th at the moment, but I think after this year we may give it a rest for a year and then maybe even widen the envelope even further after that.
Because I believe you've been down to John Down's Weird Weekend in the past.
Yes, I did. Oh, Lord, that's going back a few years. No, that must be... that must be going back about 6, 7 years now, I reckon. 6 years or so, I reckon, yeah.
Yeah, well, he's still going, isn't he, with them, so...
Oh, he's still plugging away, bless him.
I don't know. Steve, you had a question?
Yeah, is there, apart from the, shall we say, plethora of information in your books and that, is there somewhere anybody can go to find actual documents of the time to read themselves?
Oh, now it's funny you ask that question. It really is. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. There is my own website, which is ufowarminster.co.uk, and on there you will find scans of books, book covers, journals. There's a timeline, various clippings, and whatever. It's incomplete because we can only work on it when we've got the time to do it, sadly. But you know, there's enough in there to at least hopefully pique people's interest and make them think, oh, hang on a minute, there might have been something strange happening down there after all.
Right.
It's good when people can, especially people with a more scientific edge, shall we say, can actually see the original documents. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, I mean, there is a museum in Warminster called the Dewey Museum, no relation, and the late Ken Rogers, who was a UFO buff, he was involved in the Warminster phenomenon for quite a while. When he died, he donated all of his books and press clippings to it, and if you make an appointment, they're normally quite happy for you to sit at a desk and peruse through some 2 or 3 scrapbooks of a lot of Warminster-related UFO sightings.
Yeah, because no offence to all the people that have written books, but they do tend to put their own edge on it and sometimes embellish slightly.
They do, and the other problem is as well is that I found is that other people then rehash old cases, other people's cases, and put their own spin on them as well, which makes them seem a little more racy and pacey than they really are.
Yeah. How would you like Warminster to be remembered? Would you like it to be up there with Rendlesham and everything else?
I like it to be, admittedly. Again, just a useless piece of information for you. I don't know if you remember when the film Independence Day came out.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
The Warminster Council were presented by, I think it was 20th Century Fox, with a plaque and a certificate marking Warminster as the UFO capital of Great Britain.
Really?
Yep.
Wow.
I mean, going back to the 50th anniversary last year, I mean, I was... we call it the duck syndrome. It's all nice and quiet on the surface, but underneath we're paddling like hell.
Yeah.
And it must have been, the event was on the Saturday, and it must have been on the Friday morning when we were driving down. We started getting phone calls, this, that, and the other. And I mean, because I was driving, I couldn't take them. And we were setting up on the Friday afternoon, and I got a phone call from a mobile phone. It was BBC Radio 4.
All right.
Ooh.
And they said, we understand that you're doing an event to mark 50 years of the Warminster phenomenon, explain the situation. Can you come into the studio tomorrow morning and do an interview with us? And I said, well, it's a bit awkward. What time? They said 10 to 9. I said, well, hang on a minute. I'm on stage at 9:15.
God.
You know, I can't get to London and back in that speed.
Yeah.
But bless the BBC, they must have thought something of it. They actually sent out a mobile broadcast van, and there I was in the Waitrose car park in Warminster at 10 to 9 on the Saturday morning doing an interview with, I think it was Martha Carney and Dr. David Clarke.
Definitely eager then.
They were eager. And I got back to the venue and sort of took the stage, and I always remember saying this. I did basically say to people, look, I'm very sorry. I am totally Warminstered out. I said, I have just literally come hot foot from Waitrose, from doing an interview with Radio 4 with my arch adversary, Dr. David Clarke. Well, the amount of booze that I got was quite wonderful. But I did turn around and say, well, don't worry, we've gentlemanly decided to call it a draw.
Oh, God. One question I do want to ask you, Kevin, is how has the concept of UFOs changed over the years?
Immensely. Absolutely immensely. I was at college in the mid-1970s. If you declared an interest in such an arcane subject as UFOs, you were laughed at, told to go and wear the silly hat and sit in the corner for 6 months. These days, it's totally different. If people ask me what my hobbies are, I explain, and I don't get laughed at. If anything, people engage me in conversation.
Yeah.
Which is fantastic. And I call this the post-X-Files syndrome.
Oh, yes.
Simply because people are now more willing to believe.
Yeah, absolutely. I think very much it's to do with our breaking out of a certain mould of ideas about UFOs. I think one of the things that we can probably say we've experienced in time has been that UFOs have been in a very particular bracket, i.e., as we were just saying before, little green men from spaceships that are coming to invade and take over the world. Yeah. That's, I think, was a reflection of the times, you know, the 60s and 70s with the Cold War and the threat of sort of nuclear war and the sort of enemy Soviet Russia, etc. And the fact that that's kind of changed now, I think, is reflected in the fact that we are more open to different interpretations of what these UFOs might be. So,
absolutely.
One question I'd like to ask, just your personal opinion, I've asked a few UFO researchers in the past, what do you think of the ancient aliens idea that we have been somehow altered or improved or enhanced by ancient visitors from millennia ago, thousands, tens, hundreds of thousands of years ago?
I'm not against it. That's the first thing. And the other thing I'll say is read the Bible.
Okay.
There's a lot of stuff in the Bible. I mean, for example, Jesus died, was reborn 3 days later. Who's to say he wasn't teleported out of his tomb? We don't.
Yes. Yeah.
We just don't know. So, there is a certain amount of precedence involved in the ancient alien theory. But as for them tinkering with DNA or us being seeded here on Earth, I don't think so. I think we are just basically a random roll of the dice. And again, going back to what I was saying earlier on about the idea of alternative dimensions, the number of exoplanets that are being discovered almost on a weekly basis now proves that there is something out there. And in so much that, with me being a good little Catholic boy, I'm not a Catholic now, but I occasionally do just keep my eyes and ears open. It's reported that the Vatican has the second biggest xenobiological research facility outside of NASA. Now, why is that?
That is that's interesting to say the least, certainly.
And being a good little Catholic boy, when I was at school, I was always taught to believe that man was God's only creation. And now, the Catholic Church have very quietly done a U-turn and said that when intelligent life is found in the universe, it's all part of God's great plan.
Yeah, we actually covered that as a news item a while back. But yeah, there's a fundamental shift, but then of course, how many fundamental shifts have the church had to make over the last 2,000 years in terms of new discoveries in science and our understanding of us not being in the centre of the universe? The sun doesn't go around us; it's the other way around. They've had to accept these changes. So, but again, that's a pretty fundamental one. And one of the reasons why I asked you, of course, you said you started off by reading the von Daniken book, and he was a guest of ours on some time back, and he said something to me that I was quite taken aback by, and I'll ask you again the same kind of question. Not, I didn't ask him a question, he came up and, well, actually, no, I did ask him as a question. Anyway, what do you think about alien abduction? Do you think that's a reality? Do you think that actually occurs?
Something occurs, definitely. There are far too many experiences out there for it not to happen, and I would say that in the abduction cases, I would say at least 80% of those that have been abducted are keeping quiet about it.
That I could actually understand that. I mean, I've done a lot of research into what's called the old hag syndrome, the sleep paralysis and hypnagogic dream, and that can generate that sense of unworldliness and strange visitors in your bedroom at night. I mean, I'm not saying every single. I'd say I'm not saying every single experience can be explained that way. I do think a lot can be explained that way. But yes, von Daniken had said himself he wasn't particularly a believer of such a phenomena. I think his general thinking was those aliens visited us millennia ago and never come back. But I forget the name of the chap he spoke to. It was someone who was a scientist who'd done a research in this area, and he was now convinced, or was certainly willing to accept the possibility that these kind of alien visitations and abductions are still happening, that they are quite genuinely occurring. So it's one of the kind of questions I've now started asking anyone to UFOs who want to talk about it. Do you think of ancient aliens? Do you think there's abduction? Just to get a feel of what other views are. But yeah, well, thank you for answering that anyway.
Well, I mean, and again, in my defence, I will say is that with the amount of planets that are being found and with the timescale we're looking at, I think we'd have to be a very arrogant species to deny the fact that this planet has been visited.
I think there is evidence that suggests something has occurred at some time and at some level of involvement, whether it's just visiting and saying hello and going off again, or actually causing changes to the DNA structure, etc. There's a whole vast gamut of scale there of possible effect. Just one thing I wanted to quickly mention as well that was mentioned at this conference I was at yesterday that kind of ties in with what we're talking about here, and I've just gone completely blank.
While you're thinking about
it. Totally gone.
While you're thinking about it, let me just ask on the subject of abductions. You hear about these abductions, obviously, and probing and stuff like that. Do you think that does actually go on, or and secondly, do you think the government know that we're being visited?
Oh,
because the way I look at it, they can track a foreign aircraft coming into our airspace at a drop of a hat and intercept. But why are they not intercepting or tracking the fact that an alien spacecraft has come into our airspace.
Well, now we're almost getting into the black ops scenario, really, or the black budget scenario.
Down a dangerous road.
Very dangerous road. I mean, there are people that believe that our space program is really about 30 years more advanced than it really is.
Right.
Simply because that there is some kind of ongoing conflict. I believe personally that the governments of this world know more than they're letting on. Not a great deal, probably, but I think that they know more.
Yeah.
And I follow a number of people on Facebook, and they're all going, disclosure's going to happen this year, and that was last year.
Yeah.
Disclosure's going to happen this year. Edgar Mitchell says that we are not alone. Edgar Mitchell's no longer here to defend himself, sadly, but I do seriously believe that possibly that the governments of the world know more than they're letting on for the sake of the public.
Because they are trickle feeding us, aren't they? When they was opening up the UFO files and what had happened, and what alien aircraft had been recorded.
Yeah, well, of course, the problem with the particularly the British files at Q, if you have seen any of them.
Yeah, there's not much on there.
Exactly. Every name, every date, every location is blanked out, and that is about as much use as chocolate fireguard to a researcher.
Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's a bit like the files that were recently released about the JFK assassination. There were reference documents to the names of files, but you had no way of accessing the files themselves or what the content was, or even have any idea of it other than just the name. It was billed as being some great release of information, and frankly, it was bugger all there. It was nothing of any substantial use or value whatsoever. I've just remembered the thing I was going to mention, which I think you might find interesting as well, Kevin, was one of the chaps who was speaking at the conference I was at yesterday is a PhD graduate in physics. And I believe we remember a couple of years back, there were the CERN experiments, around the big ring, that they fired particles to, I think it was Venice and back, and they arrived faster than the speed of light. They did the experiment.
Which is technically impossible.
Yep, this is the thing.
Impossible.
They did the experiment over and over again, and it kept happening. And then they changed the criteria of the experiment to say that we made an error in our calculations, and it was actually a mistake. And he said, I can promise you absolutely now that was a deliberate change of the scaling to make it impossible. But it happened. They cannot explain it, don't like it, because it buggers up a lot of relativity theory, but it happened. These things were moving faster than the speed of light. He said, we don't have a problem with things that go faster than the speed of light, but they can't slow down to below the speed of light. Equally, he said things below the speed of light can't speed up to beyond. So it's like an invisible barrier between the two. These particles clearly show that barrier does not exist. And that was the big problem. And it was really fascinating for him to say it. So the guy's not, airy-fairy. He's talking about he's got a PhD graduate in physics, so he's got an idea what he's talking about. And it was just, I thought, thank you. I've been saying that for ages, that when they announced about 6 months later there was an error in the calculations, I thought, but you did the experiment repeatedly, kept getting the same results. Now you're trying to tell us it was an error in calculation. And something doesn't add up here, and it doesn't.
They are protecting their master's interests. Again, I am not a great conspiracy theorist by any means, but who actually does control us? Is it governments or is it business? Is it religion?
That's the road I would go down. The conspiracy stuff there is about finance. A scientist person I spoke to a long time ago actually said the same thing, that basically science these days is not about experimentation and frontiers. It's about finding funding. You do things that get funded. You don't research stuff that's got no money behind it. You're only interested in things that will generate funding, and businesses want things they can turn into cash and have value. The idea of as fast as the speed of light travel would be fantastic, but it's so far away that the fact that you can work, that's great, but it doesn't give us anything financial, no use to it. It's a bit like a conversation we had a couple of weeks back about the idea of the gravitational waves. What practical application do they have? Well, actually, there's a lot, but at the moment, it just seems like random stuff that doesn't really matter to us, but it should matter.
No, but I mean, you do have a valid point, because the other thing you've got to remember is that what we're doing tonight, talking via Skype, 15 years ago, this wouldn't have happened.
Oh, absolutely.
So, technology is moving forward. So, God knows what the next 50 years has got in store for us. I dread to think.
Well, as long as someone can make money out of it, the research will go ahead. That's the problem. It's not for...
Admittedly.
Yeah, that is the unfortunate thing. I mean, I'm not a great conspiracy theorist. I'm just in JFK, as I said, but I've always been of the thinking that governments are short-termists. They don't really think about the future much other than what's going to get them elected, and private companies have a lot of power because it's about generating money, and that's the conspiracy angle. It's to do with what money can be made from things rather than real research, etc. But, I'm getting my high horse again about this kind of stuff, and I'll shut up now.
Where does the money then go?
Exactly. Bank balances that get huge and huge. And that's how millionaires become billionaires, as they say.
One question I do want to ask, Kevin, and I want you, if you wouldn't mind, forgive us for our ignorance. As we said to you, the Warminster thing is not something that's been on our radar, to be honest with you. Is there anything that we've missed tonight that we haven't asked you about?
Oh, there's plenty, really, to be honest with you. I mean, over trying to condense a 15-year mystery with the people involved, sightings, everything else into, an hour's program or whatever is really impossible.
Yeah.
But you have covered the bare bones, and there will be people of a certain age, hopefully, who are listening in wherever they may be, that may suddenly think, yeah, hang on a minute, I remember about Warminster.
Yeah.
And that's the interesting thing, because one of the things I've done, which I always intended to do, and which I, as I say, I've now done, is that I have reinstigated what we now call the anniversary Skywatch in Warminster, and it normally takes place over the August Bank Holiday Saturday, and the first one, I think, in 2007, 2008, might have had about 10 people there. The following year, there were about 40 or 50 people there, and they were all people that had come out of the woodwork in that year, and they were coming up to me and saying, thanks for what you've done. Do you know, I thought I was the only one that remembered Warminster.
Wow. Brilliant. So, you've mentioned your book during the interview, and Cradle of Contact.
Yep.
Can you let people know where they can get it from?
They can get it from Amazon. It's a self-published book. John Downes is actually the publisher, funnily enough, at CFZ Publishing.
Yeah.
But it's available on Amazon. So is Steve and I's first fiction book. The second of which will hopefully be out in March as well, the sequel. So, yeah, the problem we've found is getting a publishing deal.
Yeah.
It's damn near impossible, and I will tell you why. A number of years ago, you may remember a book by Nick Pope called The Uninvited. And then there was a book by Timothy Good, I think it was Unearthly Disclosure.
Right.
They sold shed loads because this was sort of at the height of the X-Files mania.
Yeah.
They were paid massive amounts of money to write a second book, a sequel, of which Nick Pope did. I think it was Open Skies, Closed Minds, something like that. And Tim Good obviously started the treadmill going. But those books bombed. And the publishers got their fingers burned. That's why you will find it very difficult to find a mainstream publisher that will take the bit by the horns and say, yes, we'll publish a UFO book.
Right, okay.
Interesting, yeah. I was wondering if with the return of X-Files, of course, if that might make a difference. Raise X-Files generally.
6 episodes, I don't think so, personally.
No, okay.
If it was to become an annual thing of 6 episodes, then possibly yes. But at the moment, I think it's just a flash in the pan to a degree. I mean, I might be wrong, and I'd love to be wrong, but you just don't know.
Okay. Well, Kevin, I'll be honest with you, this has been one of the best, maybe the best interview we've ever had on ufology and sightings, and I'll be honest with you, it's been brilliant. There was none of the normal...
there was no theys.
No theys,
Yeah.
where people keep saying they do this and they do that and never tell you they are.
Yeah, that's one of Andy's pet peeves, isn't it?
Very much. Yeah.
Very much. His mission this year is to find out who they are.
But I must admit, with most UFO and ufology interviews, you get a lot of the silliness involved, if you can understand what I'm saying.
I do indeed.
And this has been a very eye-opening, very interesting interview, and I thank you for taking the time coming on.
It's been an absolute pleasure.
Okay, well, don't be a stranger, and have a good time in whatever you're doing and whatever endeavours come your way in the future.
I will keep you guys posted. Have no fear of that.
Thank you very much. I'm going to leave you
Can
with
I
that.
just check one thing very quickly? There's a Facebook page on the Warminster UFO. Is that one that you're involved in?
Oh, yes.
Right.
Well, there are actually a number. The one that I'm actually involved in is UFO Warminster or Warminster UFO. There is another one.
It's the UFO Skywalker.
That's Steve Wills. That's his. But the Warminster UFO one is mine, as is the Warminster 2015 and soon to be the Warminster Area 51 as well.
Okay. One thing I will ask, if it's possible, we normally like to have a little bit of a write-up that goes with our interview in our monthly magazine that we do.
Or bi-monthly.
Or bi-monthly magazine. Would you be interested in giving us an A4 or a couple of A4 article, editorial or something?
I will indeed. Just drop me a message on Facebook to remind me.
I will do. Thank you very much, Kevin. It's been brilliant.
It's been fantastic.
Thank you very much, and I hope to speak to you again soon.
Thanks a lot, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Night, Kevin.
See you. Bye.
Well, we hope you've enjoyed the show tonight, as we have enjoyed your company, and look forward to speaking to you again. That's basically it. So all that's left to say is it's good night from me.
It's good night from her.
Good night from the Black Knight in outer space.
So until next time, all that's left to say is keep the paranormal friendly. Good night and God bless.
Night, guys.
This is where it's at.
Hello, Harry Price here. Good evening. If there's nothing myself and everybody else enjoy here on the other side more is the sit back and relax and listen to Parasearch Radio with its paranormal news, views and reviews from across the UK and beyond. Make sure to find out more about them on Facebook, Twitter and the World Wide Web, whatever they are, to keep up to date with all their broadcasts throughout the week. And I hope you enjoy them as much as we do over here. Hello? Is anybody there?